Okay, so if you could write the numbers 1 to 4 going down on the left, and each time I say this Spanish phrase, you'll find it a little easier. If you're not a Spanish speaker, you'll probably struggle, especially the first one. So if you don't understand that phrase, just put 0. And then if you find that you do understand a word or two, the second time I say it, well, you could write those words down. And then by the end, perhaps you will have understood the whole thing. And I'll come back to you and I'll ask you, you know, what do you think I said? And at what point did you manage to guess what I said? So are we ready to go? Are we good? Yeah, okay. So the first attempt is: el metro no va al aeropuerto, tendrás que ir o en autobús o en taxi. Oh, Tyrone speaks Spanish, don't you? I've just remembered. Tyrone's nodding.
Okay.
Don't go giving it away, Tyrone.
Come on, that's all.
And Paolo speaking Italian is going to have a natural advantage.
A little bit, at least. Autobus is easy
Shush,
for
shush,
me.
shush, shush. I'm going to mute you. Muting you. So here comes the second one. If you didn't get it on the first one, just write 0 and better luck on the second one. El metro no va al aeropuerto. Tendrás que ir o en autobús o en taxi. So are you ready for the third one? So in the third one, make sure you're watching me, because this time you're going to have visuals. So, el metro no va al aeropuerto. Tendrás que ir o en autobús o en taxi. So that's number 3. Hopefully you're starting to get more of a sense of what I'm saying. There's one last attempt. So for the final one, I'm going to reveal to you what the context is. That should help you to get a sense of what I'm saying. So the situation that you're in when you're listening to this is that, imagine you're on a holiday, you've had a nice holiday in a Spanish city, and now it's time to go back home. So you need to get to the airport, and you've come down into the underground station to catch an underground to the airport. And you're trying to work out how to do that. And you've asked me for help. And this is what I say. El metro no va al aeropuerto. Tendrás que ir o en autobús o en taxi. Okay. So is there anyone here that doesn't speak Spanish who could take a guess? Marco, could you take a guess as to what I said?
I could not have done it at the first one, but I guess at the second try, I got it from context. So basically, the metro doesn't go to the airport, and instead you would have to take a bus or a taxi.
Yeah, perfect. So you think you got it on the second try?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. Perhaps you could type into the chat at what point you got it, if at all. Could you type that into the chat so that we can all see it? Did you get it on 1, 2, 3, or 4? So usually when I do this, it's not to such an international crowd. People often feedback that they got it on the third or the fourth one, but a lot of you got it the second time. If you speak, Valerie, I guess you must be a French speaker. Yeah.
And some Spanish as well.
And
Yeah.
some Spanish too, yeah. And when you begin to have that awareness of languages, it changes the way you listen to all languages. I think those of you that are multilingual will agree. So David, you got it on the fourth go, so well done. So you went on a little sidetrack thinking you might know what the word metro meant.
Yeah, met, the sort of stub of met, I always thought I got into thinking it meant take. And then I didn't realize that the take was further down the sentence, so I got a bit sidetracked. I obviously picked up on bus, and I picked up on taxi, and I picked up on ill, but I couldn't get the sort of bits in between. And then I picked up airport, I think, on second or third, and it wasn't until I actually got the fourth that I got the full context of it.
Do you think it helped, David, that you heard the same words? I didn't change the wording. I kept with the same wording. Do you think that helped?
I'm not sure, really. In a way, I might have had more chance of actually understanding if I'd heard a different word, because a different word might have triggered a different bit of understanding, but I don't know, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd be interested to know what the rest of you think. But my experience when I was learning Spanish, which was by moving to Spain, I couldn't speak a word of Spanish until I moved to Spain age 23, and then spent the rest of my 20s living there. And I used to constantly have the experience that if I didn't understand something, and so I would say como, and the person would helpfully rephrase, it used to drive me up the wall. Because I would think, oh God, now I've got to start from scratch. Can't you just give me the same words again, please? Just slow down a little bit the second time, or enunciate more clearly the second time. But don't keep changing the wording. It's bewildering. I'm never going to get there at this rate. Tyrone, what did you want to mention there?
Yeah, just very interesting there, because obviously in the aeronautical context, you have the standard phraseology, and then you've got the plain language for when emergencies happen and you need to step outside of that restricted language. I think particularly in standard phraseology, if you need to repeat something, it should most definitely be the same words, because you can kind of guarantee that a pilot or controller will have access to that lexical resource because they would have gone through the training. But when you get to the plain language, maybe after you repeat it slowly again, maybe subsequent attempts might have to be rephrased. That's my feeling anyway. I don't know if you agree. Would you agree with that, David? Or
I would, exactly that. I think that's been shown in quite a few examples I've seen of aviation incidents where, yes, sticking to the same wording has actually contributed to making a situation worse. However, it tends to be where someone's using colloquialism or idiom or things like that, where they've absolutely refused to go beyond what they've used the first time round. So like Tyrone says, standard phraseology is a dictionary that everyone should be aware of. So if you're talking in the lingua franca, if you want to call it that, stick to the same phraseology where it's known. But if you're really not achieving a success rate with non-standard or plain terminology, you may have to look outside the box. But I can definitely see what you're saying, Shelley, is where you're trying to get a message across. It's very difficult if you give a message and then try and give the same message in a totally different set of words, and it's not what the receptor is actually expecting from you, and then they've got to start searching for something else. I think what Tyrone's trying to say is sometimes it's trying to find a mutually understandable piece of information. So simplify is usually the best way of putting it. If you can get what you want to get across in the smallest form of plain language. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But context and stuff, because obviously aviation is highly contextualized, because a controller and a controller will know where an aircraft has been, what it's doing, and what it's next about to do. So I can definitely see, though, I mean, that phrase in Spanish was simplified language. You know, it was, I don't know how much more simple you could get than that, but the slowing down certainly, and then the introduction of the context, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's take those things one by one. So the first tip that I'm leaving you with is, when somebody didn't understand the first time, don't necessarily jump straight to rewording straight away. Yes, you need to change something, but that might be the speed or the clarity. You might give them one more chance before you resort to rewording. But of course, in your context, you're the experts. So the first thing that I did when I changed the way that I spoke in the second one, I'll come to you in just a sec, Tyrone, was that I articulated differently. I slowed down. So we'll look at that one next. But what did you want to add, Tyrone?
I was actually giving a thumbs up to what you said. It wasn't a hand.
Oh, was it? Oh, my emoji recognition skills are very poor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I slowed right down. And Philip must have a lot of expertise on this. And Paolo, have you got something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, very quickly, because I remember an example made by David. If the first time you use an idiomatic expression or a phrasal verb, that it's a problem. Do you remember the fire contained, Tyrone? Yeah. For a Spanish people, contained can be something unusual. Extinguish was a good word.
Ah, so has the fire been contained? Yeah, I posted about this because David told me about that one. Has the fire been put out is a terrible way to say it, because it's a phrasal verb and they're not well understood.
Exactly.
And then, so now was that another way that it could be said? I guess the fire has been contained. Yeah. Well, tell you what, it makes me a nervous flyer. You're going to make a nervous flyer of me in the future.
That that discussion could go on forever, that one about contained, extinguished and all that. I know we certainly have explored it, and I don't think there would ever be one single right answer, and I think in every different situation there will be a slightly different answer to it. But I think condensing it, what we've said before about making it as simple as possible and in as few words as possible that are easily understandable to every communicant and recipient, is the key. Yeah.
Yeah, choice of words is something that I look at when I'm training people, but it's not one of the things that I used here. Well, I suppose I kind of did. Tyrone, you said you thought it was really simple language, and of course in Spanish phrasal verbs don't exist. So that wasn't an option available to me.
That's why it's always good to stick to one word verbs. That's why extinguish, like extinguir. What is it in French, Valerie? I forgot. Extinguish. Is it like something along?
Éteindre le feu.
It is, yeah. Okay. So normally, word families, kind of, unless it's like Chinese or whatever, they've got more of a shot, more of a chance at understanding a one-word verb than the phrasal verb, for example. So
yeah, and they're less ambiguous, aren't they? Okay, so if we look at how did I articulate more clearly, something that I focus on a lot when I'm training people is word boundaries, because connected speech is something that can be very difficult to grasp. That contributes to you sounding like a wall of noise. Connected speech is how we all speak when we're fluent in a language, but the person that's listening that doesn't yet speak that language as fluently as you can be really confused by the way that the words have joined together, and it just sounds like a stream of noise.
Yeah, so, the weak forms there, when you said when we're speaking another language, were. How would they know that is we are?
Yeah.
So articulate. It
And
changes the sounds of words either side of it.
I've always found that when I've tried to learn any foreign language, and I've tried to learn a lot of foreign languages to a very low level. And yeah, I take it back to the time when I was at school and you had the French books out and you were taught how to speak a language, and I could do it, and I could do the, you know, an exercise to speak this thing, speak this phrase, and you would speak it and you would hear it and all those sort of things. But then as soon as I go into the country and I go into the context and someone speaks on a radio broadcast, a television broadcast, in the street, all of a sudden that long stream of words, exactly as you say, Shelley, to me becomes a wall of noise. I just can't extract words from the stream of noise.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly where I struggle when I start to try to speak a foreign language. The book dissection of how it works is easy, but the listening to the person speaking the language in general everyday speech just becomes so difficult.
Yeah. When I'm teaching this, I use sound waves to get people to think about how closely meshed together the words are when they're speaking naturally. So yeah, bringing gaps in between every word is something that works well, especially when people have got a low English level. When you're speaking in aviation and everybody has got a certain standard of English, you might find it useful, instead of putting in a long gap between each word, to think instead about the endings of words. So instead of just talking like that, you would think about each word, think about the ending for each word as you're speaking. Make sure you round off and finish every word very nicely. And that style of speaking is a lot easier to understand for people who have learned English as a foreign language, in my experience. But I know that there are lots of people here who have learned English as a second language. I say lots. We've got Bahadir, Paolo, and Marco. I guess, have you learned English as a foreign language?
I have in grade 3.
Mm-hmm. So have you found this too, guys, that those word boundaries are difficult to notice and that connected speech is tricky in English?
Absolutely. Please. No.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Actually, it still was difficult that English sentence, it goes, you know, by the rules. For example, in Russian you can say the words, for example, upside down, so the people, they will understand you. But in English, it should be you follow the, you know, strict rules, or I mean put the words in the order. That's why maybe this is some difficulties for us, for the, you know, foreigners to learn the English. But still, we're living in the, you know, not English speaking countries. Is still, we don't have too many practice. Maybe we work with the English pilots, or we work with the English phraseologists. It somehow help us. Sometimes we, you know, connect to the conference and speak with you guys. So this is a great experience.
Thanks, Bahadir. And I've just noticed Valerie's great example in the chat. Left-hand orbit was understood as door bit. Yeah, that kind, I think it's called catenation, linguists call it, where when you've got a vowel perhaps at the end of a word and a consonant at the beginning of the next one, they run together in a way that's really confusing. Are you itching to say something there?
The other way round is when it starts with a vowel, ends with the consonant.
I thought that catenation applied to both of those.
Okay.
But I'm going to go, I'm not saying that with authority. I'm going to go away and check because I thought it was both.
It's
Make a little note.
certainly true that that's exactly the process I've gone through over the last year, and it's something I wasn't really aware of. That need to separate words, where I've been communicating with the people that I've been introduced to via the forums here, it's so much easier to make myself understood if I complete words and I start and finish and you know, put not necessarily big gaps in, but just make sure that the words are understandable and discernible. And
then chunking things together as well can help, like giving people the opportunity to process what's been said. So moving on to the third one. So the third time that I repeated that phrase, you could see from my face, I was very expressive, my facial expression, I used gestures as well. So obviously in aviation, that is not available to you. Plus it's a noisy environment and the sound quality is poor. So how do you reflect on that? Like, to what degree were you relying on those visuals to be able to understand what I said? Paolo, do you have something you'd like to say? Those hands are very expressive.
Yes, in fact, remember, I'm Italian. Italians are speaking with the hands. You can normally understand what the Italian is telling you by looking at his face and the hands. You said the metro is not going to the airport. You have to go by bus.
Yeah,
you're right. I was pathetic. I should have handed it over to you, Paolo. My attempts at facial expression were very poor. So
I was going to say, obviously, in an aeronautical context, we don't have the benefit of those paralinguistic clues. It's just a stream of speech, which is why it's so vital. That's why in aviation English tests, it's not always good to see the candidate during certain parts of it, because when they're explaining things, when I ask them, what is a flight strip? When they say, it's a piece of paper like this, you know. Not that you'd ask somebody that over the radio, but, you know, just as an example.
No, but what I do when I ask a question, especially to a student pilot, normally I ask the questions like if I was dictating the question to be written by the candidate, so word by word, and I forbid to use can or can't. They have to say cannot. You can kill somebody with a can't.
Yeah, because obviously that with can and can't, that's a special case as well, because sometimes it's said as can't, as you say there, thinking it's the negative, can, can't, you know, and you hear can when it's can't, and you know, that's interesting.
Dangerous. It's dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. And it looks like we've got a new arrival. Hello. So the next thing I was going to go to was the context. So the fourth repetition, I had given you the context of the situation. I think many of you had already cottoned on by that point. Many of you had understood already what I said. But I'm, you know, when I think about context, that could be cultural, or it could be background knowledge of that particular situation. And I wonder, to what degree does that affect your communication? Is it a very context-rich environment, actually, where the context is always very apparent, so really this doesn't apply?
I wouldn't say it doesn't apply. There's always something there's always that curveball and something that comes blindsides you, I think. I don't know, what do you think, David, because you're the controller?
Yeah, I don't know, really. I mean, I was going to say, we do have the ability to, even though they're not visual cues, we do have stress, and we do have a word that I'd never even come across, prosody, which I wasn't even aware of. We have those tools that we can actually add to our conversation to make things stressed. I mean, avoiding action is the one that I always think of. So, you know, if you want somebody, turn right immediately, heading 360 degrees, stop climb flight level 50, you know, if somebody can hear that stress in your voice, they're going to be aware that you really want them to do something now. It's not just a straightforward conversation. And you can add things like that to your conversation to add stress, or you know, doing things like that to actually change the way that you're communicating. So you can add to your conversations to do that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, and the emphasis on left, for example, turn
left heading. Yeah.
I would say turn left immediately.
Yeah.
170. So that immediately will awake that those in pilots, which are normally waiting for cruise.
Yeah. Just to introduce, in case she's listening, Galia, who has joined our hubs before, is the other person who's here. Galia, can you hear us? Maybe just listening for the moment. Galia is another French teacher, another English teacher from France, who has joined us, who teaches controllers in France. So if you're listening, you're welcome along, Galia.
Hello, Galia.
Sorry to interrupt.
Well, if there's nothing more to say on context, it might be interesting to pass over to Tyrone, because Tyrone is working in this area, aren't you? You know, I've been providing this training to people, but not to pilots, and Tyrone is developing something for pilots.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we connected, because a lot of it is very relevant. And in aviation communication, obviously, it isn't always over the radio. There are situations where you'll speak face to face. In certain situations, like the ground crew or the fire crew, speaking to controllers or pilots, you know. So I guess that would be relevant there, the context, the facial cues and things like that. But obviously, a few of you are aware that I've been working on this course, not dissimilar to what Shelley's done, but obviously more oriented towards pilots and controllers. That was really helpful, actually, really useful. I can see immediately that, but you could really unpack all of that, because obviously we've mentioned the phrasal verbs is one. David, you mentioned the idiomaticity. So I've sort of put them in categories like problems with what you say, i.e. phrasal verbs, idiomaticity, colloquialized, localized language, because even idioms, they're sort of localized to certain speech communities. Like if you say, he's flying towards the big smoke, that would mean nothing to a, I don't know, a Chinese pilot, for example. Or one that I actually heard was, it's like Clapham Junction down there, so you're going to have to hold position and wait. It's like, what's Clapham Junction? Just say it's busy, or, you know. And then the next one, the way you say it, and that's where the co-articulation, speech rate, message length, and complexity, you know, the co-articulation, as Shelley said there. So all of that is in what you said there, Shelley, you know. Then obviously another big thing is what we call intercultural competence and cultural awareness. Just being aware of things. There's this thing called the accommodation theory, where you've got divergence, maintenance, and convergence. And it's when people, I'm trying to think of an example, like if you've got two gangs talking, for example, they'll want to maintain their own speech, their own identity by speaking in a certain way, and they'll do it more so to distance themselves from you. And sometimes, you might have seen it in normal life, I've found myself doing it, like if I'm walking past a gang of kids with beer, I'll change the way I speak as I'm walking past. All right, boys, or whatever, you know, just as an example. So the cultural thing is another dimension there. So,
yeah, and that can be a way to signal membership of an in-group, or signal expertise, signal that
Absolutely.
you belong and that you have all the credentials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead, Shelley.
Well, I've just noticed that Valerie gave a really good example as well of something additional that we should think about. But what did you want to say first, Tyrone?
No, it was just like there have been, from a cultural perspective, where, like in the cockpit, a Chinese first officer will not question the captain because they've got this hierarchy, and it's like, you don't question the captain. We're about to hit another aircraft, but it's impolite, you know. Which actually, 1976 or 77, the Tenerife, was it 583 people died? Two 747s, if you don't know the story, Shelley, two 747s collided head on a runway, just carnage. And basically, the captain of the, what's that Dutch airline? KLM.
KLM, yeah.
He was the poster boy superstar, years of experience, you know, that they used this guy and all the paraphernalia to attract pilots to join the job, and just like Captain Sully Sullenberger is. And basically there's this first officer that tried to tell the captain, we can't go on the runway because the Pan Am is rolling for takeoff. And the captain, you know, so that was a...
It was worse. He said, I will not wait.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's so many, it's so multifaceted, so many dimensions to this, you know. So
yeah, Philip's face is just like I'm feeling. I can see Philip. I'm thinking I'm never flying again.
No, I'm very familiar with Tenerife.
Okay.
But it's just everything that's happened today has been really informative. I really enjoy this. Like, you know, specifically like finishing your words, watching your S's, watching your EDs, you know, just really critically important. You may just kind of brush it off, but it works.
Yeah, it does work. And I get that feedback as well from people that I train. Occasionally they'll get in touch and they'll say, no, I used it and it worked. And it's the biggest one is those gaps, I think, between the words, if you can indicate where they are. But Valerie's made a really good point in the chat about questions. Do you want to tell us about that, Valerie?
Yes, can do. So when you are asking a question, your voice needs to raise at some point in order for the recipient to know that you are asking a question, because grammatically it may not be correct, as in, do you want a long question, a normal grammatical question, but you know, if you say that's okay with you, but if you say that's okay with you, your voice needs to go up at some point in order for the person you're speaking to actually know that it is a question.
That's really good to hear you say that, Valerie, because I've come to that conclusion too, purely from the experience of teaching people, because I was an English teacher for over 20 years, and I came to that conclusion too, that often people wouldn't answer me purely because they hadn't realized I'd asked them something, and it was the intonation. Paolo.
Yeah, quickly. All the American books written recently that I've been reading were making the questions in the wrong way. They are not using the quasi rule. They just ask you, you are a pilot, and for them, on a book, you are a pilot, question mark. This is not a question. I understand that intonation is good, but if you speak with an Australian, the Australian will raise the tone at the end of every sentence. So, all questions.
Yeah. So basically, you'll say, I climbed you to flight level 290. Oh, is that a question or a statement? Do we climb or not? You know, so yeah, interesting.
You fly an aeroplane?
Yeah.
Is that real that Americans are forgetting the quasi rule for the questions? It's not in the grammar anymore. I don't see it in any book. I'm speaking about the Tom Clancy book or Wilbur Smith. they are not using it.
I
Mm.
haven't noticed that, but I don't doubt it. I just haven't noticed it. It's probably happening.
And again, because there is that background noise and sometimes audibility problem with radio telephony, that raise and fall might not be quite so easily detected. So if it's not grammatically correct as a question, how will someone know it's a question? As in, you fly an aeroplane? As in, do you fly an aeroplane? The two things are the same thing, but very, very different.
And obviously it changes from place to place. Like I've been transcribing for this thesis I'm doing a lot of radio telephony. Some of it, I think, how could you have understood that? But obviously pilots and controllers are tuned into that, and you do get used to it, you know, the background noise, and you're able to kind of separate it out. But then applying the context of the background knowledge to what's happening, that's what he means that. But
again, even that can be flawed, because I've done that before, and I've transcribed something and you show it to someone else and play it to someone else, and all of a sudden they read it completely differently. Just because you think you can interpret it one way doesn't necessarily mean you're right either, unless it's grammatically correct. It's a medium that's fraught with danger, radio telephony, if it's not done properly. So yeah, you've got to be oh so careful. What I was coming back to, something that I was going to mention earlier on, is it does all come down to understanding and accommodation and empathy, really. Of without that empathy of each individual person who's using the language, they will never make themselves clearly understood to the other person who's receiving it. And I've definitely become so much more aware of the fact that people who speak the aviation language as native speakers don't have enough empathy on the whole. And without realizing that that's out there, we stand the chance of not making enough progress. And I'm trying my hardest to bring that point to people's attention. And interestingly, I actually had a conversation with one of the representatives of our local air traffic controller national organization, GATCO, about a week ago. And the first thing they said was, but we've got this Speak English program, which I know I've just started embarking on today, which encourages people to speak English across the world, be they natives or non-natives. And it helps to have that interaction and that immersion. But I don't think what was being immediately understood was that the natives just don't engage, because the natives don't realize there's a problem.
I don't know.
Yeah, and until they realize that that problem exists, and that needs to come from the highest authority, ICAO, really, we will never move this forward. And sorry to attack your home nation, Philip. I'm afraid.
Oh, that's okay.
the Americans seem to be the worst culprits for it, in terms of not understanding that there is a problem, not taking away phrasal verbs, not taking away idioms and all those sort of things.
Understood.
I was just going to say, actually, there's a lot of dialogue about this, where there's a particular group of recordings that's used to illustrate this. And it's these two controllers, Boston Mike and Kennedy Dave, is it, or something?
I don't know. Yeah.
Boston John.
And
Yeah.
I'll just
Kennedy
quickly
Steve.
interject. I'll just quickly interject, Philip, and say Brits are bad at it as well. So
Oh, my brother one time said, when I was telling about my transition to a new career, and he says, well, whoever said that Americans can speak English? So, that kind of lays it down there right now. But anyway.
And I'm sure it's not a national thing. There are a lot more highlights or lowlights, as Tyrone says, that seem to have made it onto the international stage.
Yeah, unfortunately, some people are taking that and running with it and saying all natives are bad and we need this. But what I'm actually finding from my research is that there are particular communities and varieties that do make a bit of effort or do articulate clearly. Like I've even heard non-natives, forgive the expression, say that, oh yes, the British are the clearest or whatever is the clearest, the Americans are the worst and this. So it's a variety of problems that's quite contextualized, you know. I've heard some radio telephony where, I mean, admittedly, I don't know the background of the controller, but they've spoken really clearly and articulated really well and made effort for their interlocutor, you know. So it's not a one size fits all, but certainly that's the exception and the rule, I think, you know. So
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that we've all got is getting to the people who don't realize.
yeah, I mean, even people that want to grade their language or make it easier, they don't know how to. So what Shelley was proposing there, something like that, or the course I'm doing or whatever, that will give you a set of strategies and tools that you can take away and use and basically deploy it according to a particular interlocutor in a particular context at a particular time and accommodating to the person you're talking to. You know, can you spot what they're having problems with? You know, they're a French speaker, for example. French speakers generally have problems with this, and I recognise that, so I'm going to change my language in such a way that accommodates to that speaker, you know. So,
and I think when we say that somebody lacks empathy, it can sound like we think they're a mean person, a mean-spirited person, or self-absorbed, but like that empathy is knowledge, really, isn't it? It's not a lack of, it's not necessarily just a lack of kindness. It's just an unawareness. Like when I tell people, for example, when I'm training them and I break the news to them that, hey, there are these things called phrasal verbs, and they have the same face on them that my students used to have when I was teaching English, and I would tell them about phrasal verbs. They would look at me like, what? Is this a joke? Whose idea was this? And they just weren't aware that phrasal verbs existed. But once they become aware, then the work starts, doesn't it? But until somebody points all of that out to you, how are you going to know in what way you're contributing to the problem?
As I've said to everyone I know, every aviation professional I've ever spoken to, be it pilot or air traffic controller, I've asked the same question to: do you know what a phrasal verb is? And every single person has said the same thing.
Yeah.
No idea. So I said, what do you say every single day when you talk to an aeroplane? What is the one phrase that you say to every aircraft you talk to as a tower controller? Cleared for takeoff? What does takeoff? Don't know. So, yeah, it's a phrasal verb, and they've no idea it is. I've not yet found anyone, as I say, who knows what a phrasal verb is.
Yeah, and
other than people I meet in here.
In Spanish, that would be despegar, one word, an unambiguous word. And I expect, Valerie, it's the same with French, and Paolo, the same in Italian. There'll be one unambiguous word that means that. And the opposite is not to take on. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Valerie.
Yeah. I hate to say it, we need more dead people for this to move forward. That's how it works. People die, changes are made.
Yeah, very probably.
Yeah, we were talking about this, weren't we, Tyrone, that could we make a case for money instead of focusing on safety? If safety is not perhaps the only way to argue this, that what about all of the cost implications of wasted time?
Yeah, because it's interesting how airlines will listen to money, but dead people, they'll just leave it with the lawyers. But I think Shelley was making the point that basically if 1,000 pilots with, I don't know, 1,000 aircraft over 6 months are having to repeat the same instruction a few times whilst they're on the ground, burning fuel or having to do an orbit wrong or whatever, it does translate into cost, but I don't know how you could quantify that, you know, but
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been really nice to meet you all. I hope that it was useful, and thanks Valerie for setting up this group and having me along as a guest. I appreciate the opportunity.
Very welcome, and thank you very much indeed, Shelley, for coming. Sorry, over to you, David.
I was just going to say, just to perhaps wrap it up, you did say that there were 4 tips. If you could give us the 4 words, which are the 4 tips, what would they be?
Okay, so tip number 1 would be repeat before you rephrase. Tip number 2 is articulate clearly.
Yeah.
With clear word boundaries. Tip number 4 is, if there are no visuals, be extra clear.
Yeah, use stress, use intonation, I suppose, really. Yeah,
And,
no, that's really
and then
interesting.
the 4th one was about context, which is, you know, we didn't go into that one because it was felt that doesn't apply in your setting of aviation, because it's such a context-rich environment where the context is obvious to everybody. But if the context isn't obvious to everybody, if the context isn't obvious to your listener, you need to really make sure that they know that context before you give them the message. Can we add the 3 C's for non-native speakers? What would they be?
Remember that Tenerife was originating from a context situation.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Check, confirm, and clarify.
Oh,
Yeah.
check, confirm, and clarify. Yeah, I'm just reading the comments there from Galia. Yeah. Thanks.
Good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Check, confirm, clarify. And Paolo, so that was a context misunderstanding. So one person.
Yeah, there were several. Okay, context. It was a foggy day. The controllers were unused. They never had the 3 747 in the same moment in the same airport. A 747 cannot turn 130 degrees and then another 130 degrees. So when the controller said exit at 3rd taxiway, the pilot they do not believe it. So they said 4th, and the controller started counting his pennies on those 3, because they were unable to clarify this. The 747 went to the 4th taxiway because it was unable to turn 130 degrees and then another 130. And the controller didn't know that. So at the very end, the 3rd officer said to the Captain Van Zanten of KLM, Captain, there is a plane on the runway. And the captain was very afraid to lose his flying time and said, we are not waiting. We are at takeoff. And slammed the throttle ahead.
At was the word, the key word as well, wasn't it? Or not the key word. At takeoff.
Yeah.
584 people dead in few seconds. 584. And one of the survivors was Captain Van Zanten.
Oh no. Yeah. Oh man.
Was ejected from the plane and landed standing on the runway with 583 dead people around. Only because he wasn't willing to sleep in a stupid bad hotel in Los Rodeos.
But it always seems so simple, doesn't it, at the time?
Get there, writers.
Yeah.
And do you remember Linate accident?
Yeah.
When the pilot said, I'm on taxiway Sierra, and the Italian controllers in Italian, speaking among them, they said, we don't have a taxiway Sierra. Where is that boy now? There was a stop sign, stop. It was cancelled by weather. Only the S was remaining. So he said, we are at Sierra.
Ah, yeah.
Where is Sierra? We don't have Sierra.
I think that story you told, Paolo, about the snake,
Yeah.
Yeah. If I was able, I would like to show you the photo, but I cannot share my screen probably. And Captain Bonaguidi from Meridiana flight was coming from Charm to Italy, to Milan. And one passenger was carrying a snake on board on a small box, but he was afraid that the snake was suffocating, so was punching some holes in the box. And the snake went out from one of the hole, went through all the overhead bins. An old lady opened the bin, saw a snake, so she went to the flight attendant. We have a snake over there. We have a snake. And the flight attendant, I'm sorry, lady, it's the oxygen. Sit down and relax. Breathe deeply, and the snake will disappear. And finally, they went opening. Oh, there is a snake over there. And so they called the Malta radar. Malta radar was able to connect with the veterinarian. The veterinarian was asking, can you describe the eyes of the snake? Are the pupil vertical or round? And the captain said, do I have to stir the snake in the eyes? Yes, you do.
So there's some quite complex language required there for that, you know.
Yeah. And they told him, grab the snake by the neck, have a flight attendant be ready with a fire extinguisher. If the snake is devinculating, spray a little bit in the eyes. I mean, the eyes of the snake, not of the captain. So at the end, they were able to put the snake in the refrigerator, and being a cold blood animal, it was dipping instantly. And they said, do not kill the snake. That kind of snake is eating bugs for a living. So if you kill the snake, we will have to disinfest the plane because of the possibility to get a plague on board.
Oh,
Can you imagine all this story on standard phraseology?
That's plain English at its best.
That's plain English. Captain Bonaguidi was struggling to get a level 4. I know because I was testing Captain Bonaguidi. And he said to discuss the eyes of the snake, vertical, round. Somebody said, likes a cat. Oh, likes a cat. Okay. I got it. It was a long story. By the way, the passenger was a policeman. The passenger who brought the snake on board was a policeman. So he was able to go through the safety checks.
interesting.
Fantastic.
I tell you, I have a photo. I will send the photo to David so that
I think we have had it actually, haven't we? I think I remember seeing it somewhere.
Yeah,
but yeah,
because I had it printed and showing. Do you see Italian language?
Send it through, and I'll add it to the storyboard for this meeting today.
Yeah, but there are several stories. First time I went to Kennedy, you are clear for the approach as filed, the speed south.
Don't start the speed south again.
Oh, David told me about Speed South.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was normal for them. It was normal.
Speed south gives us all nightmares, I think.
And later during taxi, okay, taxi tango, then Bravo, penalty box on the right. Penalty box on the right. What's that? It was a small parking place, so the 747 behind me was able to go and overtake me. Okay, it was many years ago. Now the controllers at Kennedy are perfect. At that time, they were not.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I know Shelley has some further commitments later on today, so it possibly is time to wrap up. I don't know if anybody has any final comments that they want to add, but certainly from my point of view, I'd really like to thank Shelley for the presentation today. It certainly wasn't boring, and it certainly was very, very interesting and inspiring for us all. I think the key point really for me is we probably are all aware, we are all people who are aware of these issues, and we all know that they exist, but all of us are all working towards trying to further safety and, as you say, reduce money for the airlines. If only we could actually get through to the people who it really mattered to. That's the key thing. But unless we try, and unless we bring along people like Shelley who are passionate about the subject as well, we don't stand a chance. So thank you very much indeed, Shelley, for your contribution today.
Good. Yeah.
Thank
Does
you.
anyone have any further questions before we wrap up today? Well, thank you very much all for joining us. I hope it's been as interesting for everyone else as it has been for me. And has anyone any objections to me putting a photograph of everyone on LinkedIn and Facebook? I'm seeing no no's, so hopefully that's okay with everyone. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for coming. Thank you again, Shelley, for the presentation, and hopefully see you all again soon. All the very best and take care.
And this is the snake.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
I found the photo.
Very good.
Unfortunately, it's not in color, but probably you can see it.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Thank you. Thanks very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you,
Thank you,
Shelley.
Sue.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Dave.
day. Take care,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.